Hello, my name is Marc-Anthony Macon. I am an artist in the Champaign-Urbana area, and I am here at the Krannert Art Museum in Champaign to interview the great Shōzō Satō, who is an artist that moved from Japan in the 60s to Champaign-Urbana and has changed the landscape here culturally.
And my name is Shōzō Satō. I finally reached 90 years old.
So, Sensei, I have a few questions that we've written down for you here, but before I get to these, I would like you to just talk a little bit about your childhood, because I feel for a lot of artists, that's where that inspiration initially comes from. So you tell us stories sometimes of when you were in school and a young boy, and the war was brewing, and the teacher asked the students what they wanted to be when they grew up. Can you tell us a little bit about that time?
And during those days, most of the kids raise arms, say, I'm going to become a captain of a troop or a nice sailor, you know, all that about military directions. And in my case, I say, I'm going to be artist. And then I repeated that at home. I answered to teachers, I'm going to be an artist. My father,
And why is that?
because Japan, at that time, everybody focusing for the World War II.
What made you feel like in your heart you were an artist and not a soldier or a pilot?
Since when I was age 4, that's far as I can remember, I've been painting, and then my mother had a beautiful Ohina doll, and I dig out all the parts, peel off the hairs, a costume, changing everything, you know, and my mother saw that, and she didn't talk to me for 3 months, because that's her treasure, you know, from her mother, so grandmother to her, and then I teared up. And so I was keenly interested in anything beautiful, but I wanted to be in my way.
So as you got older, it seems that you started to develop your artistic philosophy, and you started to set your sights on the West. So can you explain what you were thinking in terms of the differences between Japan and America, and one of the reasons you decided to move here?
Well, during the 60s, soon after war is over, peace have landed in each countries. And why we have to fight? The country to country, people to people. If you have a good neighbor, then you know a whole member of family, like your extended family like. Why can't be like that in whole world? We are same human beings, difference in colors and difference in culture. Why not be the family? And that was my wishes, in a sense.
So just sort of using art to foster a human family the globe over.
Yes, yes.
So when you started studying art formally, you studied under Komatsu Hitoshi. And can you tell us a little bit about him, especially because your current and really your lifetime of work is a lot different from what he did. So tell us a bit about the kind of art that he did.
Well, he can paint in a beautiful, typical traditional Japanese painting with beautiful colors, pigments of Japanese. And at the same time, he's one of the lifetime masterpiece is that there is a huge river in the middle of Japan. And that's caused a lot of trouble during rain seasons and such, flood, etc. And then he drew that whole river, every piece of stone and rocks, and then not water painted, but you felt the power of nature coming over you. The water is rushing over you without water. And I thought that was magical. So I talked to my teacher, why no water? That's in people's mind. So artists have to give the foundation for their imagination to expand.
Beautiful. And we can see that influence in a lot of the works in this room where something is suggested and the viewer has to add that element.
Right.
But how would you say that the work you've developed since training under him has changed and is different from the kind of work that he was doing?
Well, his main strength is typical to Japanese traditional painting. Line quality, how thin it is, or how light the ink may be, but the chi, inner energy, to be in the line. And therefore, my sensei, when I was 11, 12 years old, he constantly tell me, modern artists don't know how to cut the paper through brush. I mean, the powerful energy, when you draw a line, almost you're cutting through the paper. You know, that kind of energy, rather than just painting outline. And that's really stayed with me.
You've talked before about how with the advent of new technologies, when they were studying old scrolls of the masters, they discovered something fantastic. Can you explain about how that energy was perceived under the microscope with the scattering of the energy at the signature?
What does that mean?
Apparently not. Okay. So at one time you told me that when the artist is drawing with the brush to do calligraphy, all of the coal particles would line up in a line when they examined under a microscope. But when he went to do the signature...
I understand now what you're saying. Thank you. Black ink made out of soot. Soot is carbon, the most easiest material to submit electricity, minute electricity. Therefore, if you prepare mentally, physically, by having a deep breeze, and then start creating source of energy in the low bottom part of your torso. And then your energy is coming up through your arm and come to the tip of the brush. And then ink itself have that source of the carbon, so they interact. The carbon on the ink and then line you're creating. And then the pigment, the minute pigment of the black ink start line up with my chi and then it's carbon. And so if you look at the masterpieces in the museum, well, my teacher, when I think I was 11 or 12 years old, took me to the museum and then Shōzō, stand here, open your heart, and then listen to what the artist is saying. And happened to be the art was a 500-year-old piece. So for a little kid, 500-year-old piece, the masterpiece, how can I talk to a piece of paper? But that was a wonderful way of teaching, you know, that not only visual, but inner energy. That is the most important part. And that's what the line can cut the paper.
I've started taking this practice on since you told me that. And when I sit down to do art now, I do that focusing. And I don't know whether it's affecting any particles in the acrylic paint that I use.
Acrylic won't
Probably
do that.
not.
It has to be black ink.
But I feel like that moment of centering
That's it.
has really changed the way that I do art.
Yes.
Let's talk a bit about your time at Bunka Gakuen College in Tokyo. So what do you remember about when you first entered that school?
That school is unique in Japanese educational world. During 1920, they opened the school co-ed. Until then, there was no co-ed school system in Japan, especially higher level of school. And then the president of the school have unique, open-minded. You are paid tuition and you're a student. Your right to learn whatever you wish. You maybe sign up as an art education or literature, doesn't matter. If you like next classroom, have a wonderful discussion, you go there and then listen to the discussion, take part in it. You know, that kind of very free mind of education system. Only thing was interesting, on every Sunday, everyone can bring brown bag lunch, about a couple hundred students on the stage, the head of school, and then each Saturday, or Sunday, invite very well-known, culturally well-known person. And then they're eating lunch and drinking tea and such. In that casual atmosphere, they talk core of art. And so we always anxious to be there, to listen to who's going to be the next month or next week's guest.
And do you feel like a lot of those things that you heard from some of these, influential people are things that have found their way into your art even today?
Yes, yes. And so this Bunkan Gakuin is one of the unique in that way. So it's free if you want to learn, not only one subject, but anything you want to study while you are here, that's your right.
So you had a lot of free range in terms of what you could explore.
Yes.
And so at that time in Japan, a lot of Western style of painting was really coming into favor with educational places and artists as well. So you were given an education that included a lot of Western style painting, and those were some of the earliest paintings that you did.
Right.
And we have a few of those hanging over here in the side gallery, including a self-portrait. So can you tell us a little bit about that self-portrait?
Well, self-portrait, at the age of 20s, I read well-known novel.
The Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man.
Yeah, portrait of Dorian Gray.
Oh, Portrait of Dorian Gray, okay.
Gray. Yes. Is that possible? Art have that kind of a power? And so I sat in front of the mirror, painted myself, and hoping I would stay forever young, but it didn't happen.
That painting still looks very young, unfortunately.
That's young, and then I'm getting 90 years old.
So when you were attacking these kind of paintings that were probably very different from what you grew up seeing, how did you feel about doing that kind of art? Was it exciting?
Yes, definitely. When I was studying young age, almost like a one-to-one. And even more than that is, I didn't get to see my teacher's face 2-3 times only, because I'm in front of his studio, Japanese sliding door, and hallway, wooden hallway. I finish my project and I have it in front, and then I bow, and then I speak. I finish the project, please examine it. And then slide door open, and then his assistant will come and pick it up, and then go in, close the door. And then I sit there for 5 minutes or so, and then he come back, and then our master asks you, why you have this black line, all these things? Do you see the black line in nature? Would you think about it and bring back the answer tomorrow? You know, that kind of education. So he didn't teach me by holding hand how to use brushes, how to prepare what is the art to be. the spiritual part. And I think that was the best way of teaching professional. Amateur, they like to see immediate, development of the colorations and brush stroke.
I feel like this, I can clearly see this in the way that you teach today. and in the way even that you interact with people on a social level, which is an immediate acceptance of who they are, and then an allowance for them to find their own way while you give a little gentle nudge here and there. And when we look at a lot of the people who have been your protégés, they really are all people who have blazed their own way in life. And I'm sure that no small part of that is because of those lessons. It was never a thou shalt not. It was always a, what about this? What about that?
All the possibilities.
And so I think that your teaching has influenced people to be themselves, which is so powerful.
Well, in every semester when I have new classes to begin, and then the first session with students' conversation is, my job, you pay for your tuition, and my job is to open the window for you, window of the knowledge. And therefore, do you like to see what you see outside of this window? Okay, how about this window? And yeah, that looks nice. Okay, you had to get out of this window, climb up and get out to that world. And if you didn't like that world you saw, you can come back in and then close the window and find another one. But my job is try to find who you are, and then maybe this window is a little bit closer to what you need. That was my job.
It's an absolutely beautiful way to look at teaching, and I wish that more teachers would do so. So eventually after school, you had some pieces exhibited at the Tokyo Metropolitan Museum of Art. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like with that exhibition?
Well, that type of big, almost like a state-run museum, they have all sorts of purpose of exhibition. And since at that time, I was getting out of traditional Japanese art system to contemporary style. And at that time was the modern art of abstractions. That was the big thing. So in my classroom, I was painting traditionally, then teacher coming, erase all my work, and then do a little bit more abstractly. Don't just paint what you see. That kind of gentle direction being pointed, but not how to do it. And then that was the biggest help, to develop your own path.
So you worked on all of these abstractions and with oils and other color materials in a very non-traditional Western way for a while. And then in the 60s, you moved to the Champaign-Urbana area and eventually became faculty at the University of Illinois. And at that time, you were still doing a lot of black ink paintings. But some of your colleagues weren't happy about that. Could you explain that situation?
Well, this is the situation. One of my best friends who passed away, Doyle Moore, he was the well-known art teacher as well as a culinary art. Well, he was hundreds of different interests. Anyway, and he said, Shōzō, if you keep painting the color, you start competing with existing American faculty's work. Style may be different, but so best way to being given pressure by other faculty, get away from the pressure and then do something they cannot do.
So then you went back to those traditional...
And then traditional black ink.
And quite a lot of your work has been black ink since then, correct? So you were working at the University of Illinois, teaching classes in all these traditional Japanese arts, much of which was a completely new concept for so many Americans. And this, I feel like, was kind of the activation of your philosophy of, let's get to know each other as countries so that we don't have to fight. So this was something passed on to all of these students, correct? How did the students receive that kind of information?
They liked it.
So they had fun.
Yes.
And then eventually you took a sabbatical year. What did you do on that sabbatical year?
I get onto my van, drove all over United States. First from Champaign to West Coast, and then started coming back to the Midwest and going to the Florida. That took, 8 months or so. No daily schedule. Whatever I'm driving, oh, this is beautiful, then I park the car, and then start painting, and then nighttime come. My van was made to be travel purpose, so bed, and underneath, a lot of drawers, have a lot of cup of noodle. So I just boiled hot water and then cup of noodle for 3 days or so painting one of those paintings. And that took me a while, so many lines, structure. And then after 3-4 days, I need to take a shower. I need to eat proper food. Then I'd come down to the village and then did it as a human being. And then climb up again. So that was wonderful.
It sounds like it was quite an adventure. And during that time, you painted a lot of these pieces we see here, which are, rock formations from the American West. And recently, you and I were here to take some photographs in the museum, and there was a student who was looking at those very intently. And when she realized who you were, she came over to ask questions. And I remember her being just shocked to see American landscapes painted in this traditional Asian style. And that was something that I had never considered, that these were traditions that sprouted from the nature in Japan. And how do you draw bamboo? How do you render a bamboo forest or this kind of waterfall that you only see in Japan? So this is really a revolutionary thing for you to do that. And until she asked that question, almost a gasp at the fact that you had done it, I had never considered that. So when you were painting those, were you thinking intentionally about, here's something that has never been captured in this way?
Well, to obtain the permission to have a sabbatical leave, you have to propose during sabbatical leave, I need to accomplish this study or research, etc. And then my proposal was, up to this point, when you have a black ink painting, mostly done by Asian artists, and even some American artists, but still they are trying to paint unseen Asian landscape or Asian pagoda or those exotic things. And in here, United States, we have more than those pagoda. There's a nature-made, gorgeous landscape. And therefore, I like to go around Southwest and do record of this great nature. And then the university say, fine, take off.
So as an artist, you've done so many different things. You've worked in many mediums. You have done stage design, you've done costuming, you have done direction, writing, almost any art form that exists, you have worked in that. What would you say is key to your artistic practice? In other words, when you decide, I'm going to make a piece, maybe most recently, this beautiful golden folding screen that you finished. Can you walk us through what your process is of beginning a piece, getting that conception of it until it is finished, and what's the philosophy involved in that?
Well, it depends on the subject. how I've been encouraged to pick this subject to complete in what style. And so some of the painting, as you can see, without color, you get the real feeling, and that's enough for me. And if you add those, rocky situation and start adding color, and then the uniqueness of the formation of rock becomes secondary.
So the color will overpower the shapes and the sort of feeling of the piece?
Almost like a photograph. And so just illuminating color, one step to abstraction, and then through the abstracted way of guiding viewers' eyes, in a sense.
So, often it is said when we are talking about, say, like mythological quests, like the quest for the Holy Grail, they would say, the power isn't really in the object. It's not in the Grail itself. It's in the quest to get to that Grail. Do you feel a similar way about the process of painting? Is it about that finished product, or is the process?
Process.
So the process is more important.
If you have done 100% correct process, there's no question about failing your masterpiece.
I see. So let's talk about some individual pieces a bit. First of all, we have these plum trees behind you, one of which is entirely black and white, and there's just a glowing sense to it. Can you talk a little bit about that piece and where it came from?
Well, soon after I moved from Champaign, Urbana, to California with my retirement. I think many faculty do that. After they served in Champaign for 30, 40 years, I'm done my job. I want to get out to some warm place so we don't have to scrub ice and snow. But somehow they all come back. Somehow they all come back here because this is the home where you grew up.
Yes. So did you paint this while you were in California?
Yes.
And was it an actual tree that you knew?
Yes, I bought a young tree for $10, and then I planted in my backyard, and then that is on my living quarter, and then my atelier studio is a bit of a space. And so I had planted in between. And so $10 tree after 20 years become 4, and under the moonlight, the fragrance of the flowering plum, and then especially dew resting on each petal, and that's glorious, shiny, and it's fragrance. So go back and forth with my house to studio, the plum tree start saying, "Shōzō, paint me." "Shōzō, paint me." I said, "No, you're too difficult, too many flowers." But I said, finally, okay, I will paint you.
And now, is the other panel with color, is that the same tree or is it a different tree?
That is 20 years old tree. And it's a 90 years old tree.
90 years old.
That's me.
That's you. So this is the young tree,
yes,
and that is the older and wiser tree.
Yes. So now, why is I don't know about it, but an old tree.
But consonant with what you've been saying about how, we want that feeling in the piece, it is impossible for me to look at these without smelling those trees. So of course, it isn't a scratch and sniff painting. There's nothing olfactory added to it, but we can definitely smell it. And also, I believe you told me, I don't know if it was this tree in particular, but when you went back to visit California, you found that the new owner had chopped down a lot of the trees on the property. Was this one of those trees?
No.
So it is still there, this tree.
Well, that I don't know, because you have to walk into the residential area. And then if I do that, I'll be shot.
I see. So let's talk a bit about the centerpiece of this exhibition, the beautiful wood panels that you did, two sides. And when I met you well, I may have met you beforehand, but when you moved back here around 2016, you had already started working on the side that is golden, and you had the outlines for all of the flowers, and you were gradually adding to it. Then when COVID happened and we were on lockdown, you decided in what I think is sort of just a fit of inspiration, that you had to document that feeling of we are all trapped inside and isolated. And so I think it was maybe one day with some touch-ups the next day, or a few days later, you painted the opposite side with the bamboo in the mist. And when we all took a look at that for the first time, I remember you and I and Sumie-sensei looking at it, and I just had this sense of, this has so perfectly captured the way that we feel. I can't imagine any other result than even hundreds of years from now, someone pointing at it and saying, if you want to know what it was like during COVID times in lockdown, take a look at this bamboo forest. And it has that sense of isolation, but the little buds of hope, eventually we can be together again. So can you explain a bit about how you were feeling when you made that?
Well, you explained beautifully, so I don't have to add one more word.
Well, I have a good teacher for explanations.
Well, thank you. You have a literature degree, so you know how to choose perfect word.
Then let's talk about the opposite side, which is the one that you worked on laboriously for over a decade, and right up to the last minute of exhibition almost. I think the paint may have been a little wet when we put it up in here. Tell us what you were thinking and what your concept was for that side of the screen.
One way or another, many artists, literature or sculptor or painter, poet, to have an object, subject created. And to do that, you have to go through inner yourself, not on the surface. Why I need to paint this? And then to express that feeling, then what style? With the color or black ink only, or only line quality? You know, you choose all this. And then you start picking up brush. And so that gold painting was, here I am 90, and if I live a few more years, lucky. So I want to paint my life as iris. Which iris, that's a Shōzō iris, Japanese iris. Each blossom is about 9 to 10 inch in the size, huge. And they were gorgeous. So I started painting as my life story. That's where I'm started on the left-hand side and keep growing. At the University of Illinois, I was very busy, active in different activities. And then that's the past, and I'm getting ready to depart to another world. And so that's my lifestyle story is in that painting, in a sense. So for that, of course, all my dear friends and family cannot live up to what I wish them to live long. So the deceased, I painted in white. There is white Japanese Shōzō iris. They're just simply gorgeous. And so that's my life story. And this is Doyle Moore, and this is my wife within the white flowers.
And now the names of some of those people were written on the blossoms.
Each one, yes.
And so we can't tell right now who each of them is, but if someone were to take an X-ray, they may be able to tell who is who on those. So I think that when people have come into the exhibition here, a lot of them have marveled at the kind of dichotomy of that screen, that each side is completely different. What was the reason you decided to have both of those concepts on the same screen?
Because that's us. That's a human. We all have a bright side and all have a weak side. The religions and the teachings and all that supposed to help you. But really come down to it, your own belief to yourself. Not on a book, not on what they say, but who you are, you have to understand. Otherwise, you can walk one step forward, you bump into the wall.
Let's talk about Fury of the Pacific a bit. I believe this is the first painting of yours that I ever saw, at least that I knew was yours. So when I came to your studio for the first time, this was hanging over the mantelpiece. And you went to get some supplies, and I stood there and stared at it, just transfixed. And again, looking at that, you can hear the weather going on in it, and you can feel how precarious that tree is just clinging there. Tell us about the feeling of painting it. What inspired you to paint that?
That's a really good example, because soon after I moved out from Shambana and to California, and then about a year later or so, they had the biggest hurricane. And then along the coast, 40 houses have been crushed down by the falling trees, big. And so outside of my house, you hear the wind blowing. I want to see what the power of nature is. So I jump out. I was young then. And to the beach, sat there getting wet, enjoying each wave, how the splash goes, and then what the land on the trees are trying to cling on to the little rock to survive. And then I was in that stormy mentality. So I came back to my studio, spread out the painting, started painting immediately, but not by brush, splashing. So I had a light ink with big brush, painted, and then splashing fresh water on a big brush. Then that push out the ink and then expose a white base. And then I have a hair dryer. Immediately dry them, otherwise the ink come back. And so that was a very interesting experience, splashing ink, hair dryer.
But I mean, this really kind of goes along with much of what you've taught me about art. You know, when you were doing that, it was like you were employing the techniques that nature was using to make the storm. You had the hairdryer, you were making wind, you were using water, you were throwing things at the canvas.
Exactly.
So you used Fury to paint Fury of the Pacific.
But the title also have a double meaning.
Please explain.
Because World War II took place over the Pacific Ocean.
I see.
So Fury of the Pacific, double meaning to that World War II. How many thousands of young soldiers and sailors died in that war?
So last year, you took a trip to Hawaii, and you decided you wanted to do some paintings that were very different from any that you had done. And I remember you telling me that these paintings had been growing in you for decades, but you were afraid to paint them. And you finally felt you had the fortitude to do that, so you went to Hawaii and did some very evocative color paintings. that are behind me here. Yes. And these were your memories from wartime when you were about 11 or 12 years old. So can you please tell us about the process of that and what you were thinking?
Well, not very happy memories. But being young, anything exciting you, in a sense. So whenever we have siren going on, and then we quickly get into subway station, go down the lower subway station. And then one time, the city of Osaka was burning, whole city. And we were in deep down the base subway station. But air coming in from outside, the all heated smoke. And the time we get out from there next day, we're all black. And then what I saw on the ground is that painting. The whole city burned down. And not happy, but as a young child, that was kind of exciting what power human beings have, good or bad. Until yesterday, there was a beautiful building and street trees, and then they're all gone. And even I step on a dead, burned body and shocked, and I step on that person. And that kind of memory, I wasn't trying to forget, but was to put it aside because of the dark side of my life memory. But when it comes to my age as it is now, I said, I have to leave this information for next generation to come. And luckily, United States have not been attacked on the mainland, except the Twin Towers. And so the people have no idea when your whole city burned up by bombing. And of course, that's still going on in Middle East. And unfortunate. But the people who have not exposed to that tragedy, they should know you can take this route in your life or this route in your life. And then you can avoid misery of human society.
I think this painting here of the mother who lost her child in the flames, I have seen dozens of times in this space, people come in and just be profoundly affected by looking at it. And I think, to me, it is the central piece of your philosophy as an artist, in that anyone looking at that is a changed person. And they understand very clearly this is something that affected real people and made their lives horrible or ended their lives. And it is visceral. So I think that people looking at that have got a clear understanding of what is at risk when we don't understand one another. So I think that may be my favorite piece here, even though the memory is terrible.
Yeah, terrible, yes.
Terrible memory. But seeing the way that it has affected and changed people, thank you for painting it, and we know it was hard for you to paint that.
Well, I felt painting this sad side of my memory in life, I felt like responsibility to share this can happen to you if we choose wrong government.
Yes, and these paintings were all done in a style very different from any of your other work. What made you choose this particular style for these works?
Well, in your memory, you don't have any style, just a thought. Abstractly.
I see.
And then when you try to visualize, because you're trying to share with other people, So I don't want to be too abstracted or too refined, just raw as possible, raw as this reality.
I see. To me, I feel like there is almost a childlike quality to them that makes me feel that because your memories were from childhood, that visual style impacted the way that they look.
Yes, yes, yes.
So when we look at them, I feel like I know this wasn't an adult looking at this. So speaking of child and adult, I have one last question. I've been studying under you for not quite a decade and have learned quite a lot. And I often think of the time when I showed up to your studio and we'd been practicing calligraphy for a while. And at that point, I felt like I was terrible at calligraphy. Right now, I feel that I'm okay. I'm getting there. But I felt I was terrible. And you rolled out a beautifully mounted scroll with blank paper on it. And you said, in one try, go and paint this Zen statement on there. Go and write that with your calligraphy brush. And the statement was, don't rely on the manual. And I was petrified. This scroll probably cost $500, $600 to get made, and I had one shot to make it decent. And I felt terror in my heart when you asked me that. But you made me sit down and collect my thoughts and take a deep breath, and in one, I did it. And it was maybe one of the best pieces I've ever done. Yes. So I think that to me, this is the best personal example I have of the Tiger King story. So could you please tell us the story of the Tiger King with the cubs on the cliff?
Oh, yes. This is based on a no drama and then kabuki, popular story. And then they perform a human decorated, beautiful kabuki style wig, big white wig, and then sun is a red wigs, and gorgeous metallic costume. And then father is kicking young cub. So the cub is rolling to go to the Hanamichi, the runway, to reach to the stage. And then father, actor, pretended that on the runway is way down there, distance. And so he's looking down into bottom of the valley, cleft, and then hoping that sun will have enough energy to come back again to me. And if doesn't, have no reason to be appointed him as the next king of the animal. That kind of harsh training. And that king of the beast will apply to his own son. And that is the typical Asian way of thinking of fathers and then sons' relationship. So most sons hate father until they grew up to understand why he said that, why he hate me for that.
Well, I understand why you have thrown me off of so many cliffs.
Yeah.
And I thank you for every time you have kicked me off of a cliff, because I have climbed back up a better person, a stronger artist, and someone who is more in tune with his community, his environment, and the work that he's doing. So, and also, when I've talked to some of your former students, especially when this exhibition opened, so many of them told me the stories of the times you threw them off the cliff. And everyone got very emotional, and all of them were so thankful for that plummet to the bottom and for the climb back up. So thank you, Sensei, for pushing all of the people off the cliff and sitting and waiting patiently for us to climb back up, because the world is greatly improved by not just the artwork that you've made, but the artwork and community that has been built by your students in accordance with what you taught them. So any final words you have to say about art or your philosophy before we sign off here?
I think art is purified, most pure form of human expression. And it can be realistic way or abstract way, but will reach to the viewers. And if doesn't, the art is not good one.
I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Sensei. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you for kind directions.